In the US alone, over 17 million people will have had at least one depressive episode in their lifetime, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. New evidence suggests that there is a strong genetic component to mental illnesses such as depression. You may remember from high school biology that DNA contains all your genetic information that is inherited from your parents. But did you know that some inheritance happens outside of your DNA? This is called epigenetic inheritance. It works by using various markers on bundled chromatin to modify DNA expression based on lived experiences. To think about this, let's use the analogy of trying to read a book. The book in this case is bundled chromatin, which contains protein, RNA, and DNA. Certain markers such as acetyl groups will help open the pages of the book, making it easier to read, but other markers like a phosphate group will instead wind the book tighter and make it harder to read. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, there's increasing evidence that environmental factors interact with genes through epigenetics. And epigenetics is one of the two main mechanisms which determines one's risk for depression. In other words, current approaches used to understand the heritability and nature of depression often use both genetics and epigenetics. So, say you or a loved one has been affected by depression. Due to one's lived experiences, it is possible that the affected individual's children may have it as well. In a study conducted by UK researchers, first-degree relatives of someone with depression, that is, your parents, kids, and siblings, are at twice the risk of developing depression. But do keep in mind that this study only establishes a strong correlation which is not causation. Now, keep in mind there are several genes implicated in the onset of depression, so for simplicity, we will talk about gene SLC6A4, a serotonin transporter. For a quick refresher, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is in charge of regulating our mood and is often known as the happy drug. And a transporter is, well, exactly what it sounds like. Continuing with the analogy from earlier, the SLC6A4 gene is like a chapter in the book. Different alleles and variants represent different sets of instructions that could be in that chapter. Gene-environment interactions on the serotonin transporter gene variant called 5-HTT-LPR are of particular interest to scientists. For example, if one person has the short 5-HTT-LPR instruction, then their body will make fewer serotonin transporters than someone who has a different set of instructions. People who have one or two short alleles of this variant and experience traumatic life events are at a greater risk of developing depression. Furthermore, short alleles of the 5-HTT-LPR variant are seen commonly in individuals with severe depression. Depression is complex because it can result from a combination of both genetic and environmental factors, such as family support, social stressors, and peer influences. Though there is complexity in the causes of depression, the symptoms themselves also present differently depending on age, culture, and gender identity. So let's talk about age. Although still highly stigmatized, depression is shown in the media and studied commonly in middle-aged adults and older. But what about children? Studies show that nearly 3/4 of adult disorders have their origins during childhood, becoming harder to treat with greater consequences over time. Researchers say that early childhood mental health intervention and support can better or even help prevent depression and anxiety. This is key because mental illness is the leading cause of disability among children, and if it goes untreated for years, it can even disrupt healthy development. What's worse, the National Institute of Mental Health claims that the onset of depression has manifested earlier and earlier in recent times. Scientific evidence has examined clinical depression in children as young as 3 years old. So now that we know the importance of this topic, how can we identify symptoms of depression in children? Like we said earlier, symptoms may vary, but there are a few common ones to look out for. For example, in toddlers, severe irritability, excessive guilt, and a lack of interest in pleasurable activities also called anhedonia, and an extreme separation anxiety. One of the main issues is that caregivers often fail to report sudden changes in play behavior and excessive irritability, as such behavior in moderation can be seen as typical of toddlers. Although studies once thought that childhood mental illnesses would get better with age, this has since been largely disproven. Scientists now say watchful waiting is no longer an acceptable approach to early onset symptoms. Furthermore, a child's environment can serve as a predictor for the severity of their possible depression in the future. According to peer-reviewed studies, family support in adolescence may reduce depressive symptoms in boys and girls who have been exposed to early life stressors that have occurred before the age of 11. Since family support and early identification is crucial, how can parents and caretakers equip themselves with the skill to have these conversations? Well, researchers still first and foremost recommend taking note of any sudden behavioral changes and talking to your child's pediatrician, especially if you have a significant family history of mental illness. Another key skill to start developing would be to help grow your child's capacity to identify emotions both in themselves and in others. This has been shown to help set the stage of emotional regulation that is vital to helping your child navigate their thoughts. Recent studies show that young children have much more emotional awareness than what was once previously thought. Another recommendation is to create and incentivize situations for the child that help elicit positive emotions. This is based on the model that individuals with depression have less of a reaction to positive stimuli than individuals without depression. Remember, even if you do happen to have a family history of depression, which means your kid likely has genetic or epigenetic predisposition, depression is a combination of genetic and environmental factors. This means that by changing your kid's environment, by providing more support and intervening early, you as parents could still potentially lower your kid's overall risk for experiencing depression. So let's recap. Because there has been a strong genetic component to depression, it is crucial that parents and caregivers learn to identify possible signs early to provide the best possible outcome for the child, especially if there is a known history of mental illness in the family. We talked about the importance of environment and epigenetic factors. We even mentioned how pivotal genes can interact with the environment and shape one's susceptibility for depression. Last but certainly not least, we discussed 3 key recommendations to help create a nurturing environment for your child. Thank you for listening, and we hope this was helpful. See you next time.